I started the violin when I was 4. I liked the sound of it, so that's why I chose it. That's why I said to my parents, I want to play this instrument. And, then you start to get reaction from people. Now, is he talented? Does he have a gift? And so on and so forth. I was always into sound. I liked, I had a good concept of sound on the violin that I heard it in my head. So people always say, oh, he has a very nice sound and so on. And one thing leads to another, and you develop, you study. I studied with one teacher actually in Israel. I studied with a teacher who was of Russian background. I studied with her. She's the only one that I studied with. We studied at the age of 5, and she taught me until I was 13, and that's when I came to the States. So, so one thing leads to another, and it says, oh, well, he's pretty talented, and so on. So it's not like, I want to be, I wake up one morning and says, that's what I want to do. It's a gradual thing. I was talented and played the violin, that people could not didn't really take it very seriously because of my polio, because I had polio when I was 4. And so I was sitting down and I was playing, and people always said, well, I don't know if you can have a career, blah, blah, blah. I didn't take it seriously. And so for me to go to the United States, I would say that, in every little country, after a while, you go abroad to complete your studies. And we have this Hebrew word that says lehishtalmut, which means to complete, a completion. So, and I wasn't having any success. I was on the Ed Sullivan Show twice, sort of 3 times when I was 13 and 3 times when I was 18. And I'll just give you a very quick history about this. Ed Sullivan in 1958 came to Israel because he wanted to have a show made only of Israeli artists, Israeli acts. Because with Ed Sullivan, Ed Sullivan was a true variety program. So that's why I said acts, because it's like anything went. So he wanted to do it just from Israeli artists. So there were national auditions. Everybody would audition, we want to go on the Ed Sullivan Show, that people would audition anybody that did anything, whether musicians or dancers or singers or comedians, whatever it is. And then it was narrowed down to a few, and then he came himself to Israel for the final, final choosing. And so I was one of the people that were chosen to be on the show. I was looking forward to coming to the States. I took some English in school. First time, in my English, there was no English. And there was an English book, I remember, and there was a picture of the Empire State Building in the textbook. And I said, one of these days, I'm going to be there. And so it was my dream, to go to the States. So I was very, very, I loved the idea to have a chance to go to the States. It's very funny because this is the room that she taught in, where we are right now. That's her studio. Well, let me give you the look. I studied in very, very short history of the way I studied. My first teacher, as I mentioned before, was a lady. Her name was Rivka Goldgard. She was of Russian background, and she was basically a taskmaster. She was very good. She knew certain things, but it was one of those things where you better practice or else. It was one of those things, and if you don't sound good, I'll tell you what to do and you do it. Then I came to the States, and I studied with Dorothy DeLay and with Ivan Galamian. So at that time, it's very interesting. I heard about Galamian when I was still in Israel, and that when the Ed Sullivan situation arose, that was my way of going to Juilliard and studying with Galamian, because that was the guy. So, but at that time, Dorothy DeLay was his assistant. So she came when I remember I was in a hotel downtown in Manhattan, the first hotel, very, very depressing. It was one of those hotels where you opened the door and you could touch the window. That's how big the room was. And she came in, and I was not very happy because I was missing my father, because I came here only with my mother. And then my father joined us later. And I was missing my friends. I had friends in school and stuff. So I was alone, and I didn't speak the language. And so I was not in a great mood. And Miss DeLay came in, and she said something in English, and I couldn't understand what she was talking about, and I just played. So that was, and then we started, so she was the first one to teach me. And then Galamian joined later, a few months later. So her system was different than anything that I've experienced before. The way that she would teach would be, you would play something and she would ask you what you thought about it. And she would ask you what I think can be done to maybe improve it, or what I think. In other words, and I would always hate it, because I wasn't used to it. I was used to people telling me what to do, and I would try and do it. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked me, what should I do? And I would always say to her, just tell me. She would always, my favorite example is when something was out of tune, she would say, Sugar Plum, she would always call you Sugar Plum, he was from Kansas. She said, Sugar Plum, what is your concept of G sharp? That was a code word that it was a little out of tune. And I would always say, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it. She wouldn't do that. She would do things to make you think. The student just following orders in some ways is not as imaginative. In other words, the concept, it does not require so much imagination. It does not require a lot of thought. It just requires following orders. That does not make it your own. If you actually figure out what the problems are, whether it's phrasing, whether it's intonation, whether it's timing, whatever it is, if you can figure it out yourself, then you own it. I imitated what I heard. Yeah, I imitated what I heard. So that's, the thing is that one of the things that I feel that I'm very lucky, two things actually, maybe a few more. First of all, I'm lucky that I make a living at something that I love, which is actually should be the goal of everybody. The goal of everybody is to if you can make a living with something that you really adore, what better things can happen if you can do that. That's one thing. The other thing is that I'm actually able to cry when I hear certain kinds of music. And I think that's amazing that I'm affected by that, and it's something, it's me, so if I hear something on the radio and I said, oh my God. A recording that I think is me and I hate it, I'll cry. Did I record this? Sometimes, I hear this, I listen on the radio and I hear a violinist playing, and I said, oh my God, I hope it's not me. Because if it's me, I wouldn't do it like that today. Or you can say, it better be me because it's too good. So it's always something. What makes me cry? Anything that, I remember my first experiences, I suppose, that made me cry is chamber music by Brahms. uh, the opening of Mozart's Requiem, that is just like, forget about it. It's just, and it's not like, it's not a tearjerker. It's just, it moves you. It moves you in a certain way. And you know, and people ask why, and I can't understand. You know, it must be, I think that if you want to really be specific and you want to be really accurate as what it is scientific about it, it's probably a thing about harmonies, that the harmonies affect you in a certain way. And that's why I believe that not everybody cries in the same spot. You know, it's a harmonic reaction. And so that's very scientific. You know, it's not like you say, oh, well, you know, just that music moves you. You know, like when you listen, for example, to Puccini, you know, like Bohème, you know, and that's kind of automatic. They almost call it musical pornography because it makes you, oh my God, you know. So, but what is that really? It's basically really, it's the way the composer put the harmonies together, and I think that has an effect. That's one of the great challenges for a performing musician, and that's what I talk about to my students. I always say to them, you know, it's very easy to play a piece for the first time because you're excited, you know, you're a little nervous, you get inspired. Then the second time comes and you feel a little better about it because you know that you can do it. And then the third time it may be, well, you know, how do I play that piece? Well, I play that piece like yesterday. And then the fourth time, who knows? And then after a while, the danger is to play the piece the way it goes. And that's where the mistake is. You know, I mean, there's no such thing as the way it goes. You know, you don't play a piece the way it goes. You play a piece the way it is. And the way it goes is danger because then, as a result, what happens is you imitate what you do, and it loses the spontaneity. So the way I deal with that is I basically always listen to the music rather than just saying, well, you know, I play this phrase this way and that's the way I play it. That's not necessarily the case. You know, I may play the phrase slightly differently. And again, it's not a question of today I'm playing loud, tomorrow I'm playing soft. It's not like that. It's very subtle. And I always call it, you know, I always call it this our kind of improvisation. Because when people play jazz, they improvise, but when they improvise, they really improvise. They play different notes, they play different harmonies, and they do certain things. And if you hear a piece one time, you hear the same piece the second time, it's really different. With classical musicians, the improvisation is very subtle. You know, you hear it the first time, it's like this. You hear it the second time, it has maybe a freshness. And that's a little bit of an improvisation, but it's very subtle. It's about timing, it's about phrasing, it's about color, but it's not about necessarily, it's not about notes. The notes are the same. So in many ways, to improvise that way in classical music is very difficult. Color has to do with a lot of things. Again, people with talent know how to do color. Now, if you want me to talk to you about uh, the technical aspect of color, it has to do with bow pressure. It has to do with bow speed. It has to do with the amount of vibrato that you use in the left hand. It has to do with, do you use more vibrato, do you use less vibrato? What's the combination? You know, it has to do, but these are very kind of like scientific kind of things. Color kind of, there's another thing, you know, color can, when people are inspired, they use color. And of course, color is a talent. Do you teach Can you teach that? I don't think so. You can say, well, here you should play softer, here you should play more, here you should do. But when it comes to naturally doing something, that's a talent. And I always mention to my students, I always said, I don't want to know what you're doing. In other words, the minute I know what you're doing, then it's not spontaneous. Like say, oh, here they're going to slow down, here they're going to play softer, here they're going to play out. It becomes an affect. I want you to be a magician, not musician, a magician. What does a magician do? It does something that's sleight of hand and you see it. It's the same thing with music. You have to be a magician so that when the listener listens, the listener says, oh my God, this is so amazing. Rather than saying, well, I like the way he did this and I like the way he did that. That's no longer spontaneous. I just want to relax. Of course, as a teacher, if somebody asks me what made it so good, I can kind of go into it under a magnifying glass and say, well, it was this way, it was that way. But as a listener, I just want to say, oh, that was so fresh, that was so nice, I just loved it. And I don't want to ask any questions. And that's a talent. All I do is my job. My job is to tell the audience what is my concept of the piece that I'm playing. Listen to what I'm playing, and this is the way I feel about that piece. And that hopefully communicates to the audience. That's my job. So my job is not to play something and to say, well, you can listen in if you want. I'm doing my own thing. I'm doing this and I'm presenting this for the audience. So whenever I play a piece, this is my representation of the piece, and I hope that the audience understands the way I feel about it. That's the way I do it. And that has nothing to do whether it's Carnegie Hall or whether it's in a small place, any place. Whenever I play, whether it's a big place or a small town, big town, et cetera, I have to communicate with the audience. I hope I never get bored with music. Right now, because of my teaching and my playing and my conducting, I have a lot of stuff that still is fresh for me and new to me, and one thing helps the other. And so I'm not thinking about what my effect would be. I don't think about it. I'm being very selfish. I think about how am I going to continue to have a good time in music and to be still inspired by music. And as long as I can do that, then my goal is accomplished. One of my dreams was to play with the Israel Philharmonic, because growing up in Israel, the dream is, if you're a musician in Israel, is to play with the Israel Philharmonic. So that was, I would say, that's probably was very memorable to me, and it was very funny because it's a good story. They took out a copy of a letter that I wrote when I was 11 years old, and I wanted to play with the Israel Philharmonic. And I wrote a letter to the Philharmonic saying, I hereby request an audition to play with the orchestra. I wrote it all myself in pen and so on, sincerely yours and so on, and they never answered. And then they showed it to me because they kept it. So when I played with them, that was like a dream come true for me as a youngster. I like the sound of the violin. Everybody that, when you hear people playing different instruments and you ask them, what was that about this instrument that you like? They would always say that it appeals to me. My favorite example is, in our program, the Program Music program, it's a program for talented string players, and one of our teachers is a wonderful bass player. And one time I asked her, said, did you start on the bass or did you just play the cello and then you decided to? She said, no, I always wanted to play the bass. So what is it about the bass? Well, it's about, somebody's reacting to a low sound. I reacted to a high sound. My daughter always wanted to play the flute. What is it about it? I don't know. It's something that appeals to you. It's the same thing about like, you go to a restaurant and you look at something and say, I don't like this. That's not my, I hate that. I like this. I don't. What is it? Well, we are all different. My first violin was almost a toy-sized violin, which didn't sound very well. And I just said, that's not what I want. Because because what I heard in my ear was, I heard Heifetz, Jascha Heifetz on the radio. That was the sound that I wanted to hear. So, I was not very impressed by that. And then there was another one that was, none of it was very, very, I was not impressed by it. I always played on, whatever was available. So it was not a big deal. I would say they were quietly supportive, and they were not. They believed in me. That's the thing. They believed in me. It's very easy, when you have a child, with an illness like polio, you can't walk, and so on and so forth. It's very easy to be, shall we say, quietly about, oh, he's playing music that's very nice. But no, they didn't do that. They said, you've got to, they took my music seriously. They took me seriously. And that's the important thing, because if they didn't take me seriously, then, look, when you were a kid, practicing is not something that comes naturally to you. If you get a kid if you tell me a kid that involves you really incredibly disciplined with practicing, I would say that kid is very unusual. Child prodigy is often used wrongly, I think. I mean, it's used commonly. If you wanna know what a child prodigy is, Mozart was a child prodigy. That's a prodigy. To be able to compose at such an early age. Somebody who is gifted, I suppose, I would call them gifted, talented, so you can say very talented, extremely talented. But prodigy is I don't know, it's used too often, and it's the same thing as genius. Oh, this guy's a genius. What's a genius? What do you mean? Mozart was a genius. Einstein was a genius. I would describe myself as somebody very talented. And if you talk to my wife, she would absolutely disagree. She would say that I was much more than that. But I don't think so. I mean, I had a gift. When I was 13 and I was on the Ed Sullivan Show. I still feel that when you heard me play at the age of 13, you thought that it was somebody who was 13, not somebody who was 25. And sometimes you hear kids at the age of 13 and they're just like accomplished, totally, ready for Carnegie Hall. But then comes the big challenge. What happens in the next 5 years, next 6 years? Will you survive your gift? That's important. Certain things you cannot teach, and certain things you can. Now, Miss DeLay was very interesting. She believed that you could teach anything. And we would always have a fight about it. We would say, no, Miss DeLay, no, you can teach this, you can teach this, you can teach that, but you cannot teach a certain gift for you know, when somebody plays and it moves you. Cannot teach that. Cannot teach that. That's something that, and you don't, you know, and the player obviously does not really know what he or she do to make that happen. It's very funny. The other day, it was like a week ago, somebody sent me an email. This guy plays the piano, an amateur pianist, but he's very serious. And he said, how do you make an audience cry? He says, I want to know how you produce tears in the listener when you play. Because I don't know how to do it, and I want to know what the deal is. And I said to him, I don't know what it is. I said, all you have to do is just think about the music and about how you feel about the music, and the rest is up to the audience. If that makes them cry, you know, people can cry in concerts for various reasons. They can cry if what you play brings some sad memory, you can do that. You can cry by a particular effect of harmonies that just makes you cry. Sometimes I teach, when I teach and I have studio classes with our kids, sometimes we take one of the things that we talk about is the goosebump moment in music. You know, what moment in music gives you the goosebumps? And I'm always curious about whether the same moment would give goosebumps to all the people, or whether each person has a different moment in music that gives them the goosebumps. And I think that that's the case. Everybody reacts differently. So one of those things I don't think you can teach. We have a lot of applicants for our program. This program my wife started 23 years ago for very talented string players. And so they send us videos. And you know, you have so many different experiences listening, you know, and you see somebody plays, and sometimes they play perfectly and nothing happens here, and nothing happens here. And then you see somebody play, and maybe it's not as perfect, but you say, oh, that person really's got it. Is it a better teacher? No. It's something that you're born with. Now, how do you treat that? We don't know. But it's something that you have. And that's what I said to Ms. DeLay. You cannot teach that. Sometimes people play and they don't know what they do. It just comes and plays. And one morning they wake up and they said, you know, what I'm doing is really, really tough. And then they start thinking about it, and it's gone. And I'm telling you, if you look at YouTube, on the internet, you see so many incredibly talented and gifted players, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, and you say, oh my God, this does not necessarily mean that they're going to grow up and have a career. Doesn't mean that at all. Sometimes, as a matter of fact, when we hear somebody who is incredibly talented at the age of 11 or 12 or 13, we always say we have to cross our fingers, because what would happen to these people when they turn 18 or 19? There is so many opportunities for everything to go wrong. Let's face it, it's to be a musician it's not normal. It's abnormal. You know, if you are, anything that you do as a child that is special, whether it's ice skating, playing tennis, playing the violin, playing the cello, playing the piano, which requires practicing. What's natural about that? You know, that you have to spend, you know, when I was growing up, I spent 3 hours a day practicing. Now, 3 hours a day is not even a lot. Some kids, and I always say to them, don't practice, 5 hours is it. But can you imagine that you have to go to school and practice and do your homework? It's very serious. And so sometimes, you have to have a real something inside of you that really wants to do it. It's a different, exactly that. It's a different style. It's not as, we always say, playing the violin in the grand tradition, the grand tradition. So what is the grand tradition? Well, I can give you examples of grand tradition. I like to play in the grand tradition. Heifetz was in the grand tradition. Uh, you know, Chrysler was just beginning, Oistrakh, Stern, these were all sort of grand tradition, sort of basic sound of the instrument, big lush sound instrument, certain slides, certain way of phrasing and so on, big playing. Right now there's a lot of stuff, some people still play in the grand tradition, but a lot of them play sometimes, you have this business with the early music playing where they don't vibrate, that comes into this situation. Shifting is a bit less than it used to be and so on. And it's very interesting because I feel that during our summer program, the program music program, we always have a couple of nights where I play for the students. It's like studying history. I play them old violinists. I play them violinists that used to play 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It's changed. It's like jazz, and a lot of the stuff, if you ask me why has it changed, I believe that it has changed because, every time something gets evolved and then people listen, there's so much more chance of listening today. It's very easy, you just put on YouTube and you can listen to anything you want. And it depends who is affected by what. I always like to tell my kids, don't listen only to who is playing today, these days. You've got to listen to who played 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It's part of history, because otherwise you play like blinders. Like you have blinders, you don't see anything. You have to have a history of listening. When I was going to Juilliard, we listened to everything. We listened to Chrysler, we listened to Oistrakh. Of course, everybody listened to Heifetz. He was the guy that everybody listened to. Today, sometimes they do too. I mean, Milstein, Elman, Stern, and so on. And it's like a part of learning. You learn. But jazz is the same thing. How did jazz develop? When you listen to Art Tatum, that's a different kind of piano playing than if you listen to somebody who's playing today. It's different harmonies, but they were all affected by what happened before. It's all historical. Having polio did not affect my career as to getting the career. That was a little more difficult. Because I constantly had to prove to people that they should just not look at the fact that I'm sitting, but just listen to me. So, and that was it. It could have had an effect, a negative effect, but my parents were very, very much believers in me. They were very strict as far as, especially my mother, you've got to practice. That was basically the whole thing of my childhood, is you got to practice. That's what we always would fight about. We wouldn't fight about anything else. I was pretty good in school and so on, but you got to practice. And that's what I tell everybody, you've got, practicing is really important. You can have the gift. What the old Jascha Heifetz used to say, practice, to playing the violin is well, let me see, 10% talent and 90% sweat, where you have to really practice. The Barack Obama one was for me uh, an incredible experience simply because it was so cold. It was so cold. It was just incredible. But it was such a great honor, and it was being a part of history is something special. You know, I've played many places. You know, I played. I suppose that the something that stands out is when you play something that is, as I said before, like a part of history. So I played in Russia before, when it was the Soviet Union with the Israel Philharmonic. That for me stands out because it was something that didn't occur before. It was like it had political ramifications and so on, and so that stands out. Playing in the Eastern Bloc countries, sometimes that stands out. But I know that after this interview, I would think of so many things that I did not mention about what stands out as that I played. You know, it's hard when it's hot, and it's hard when it's cold. It's, you know, you want to play inside a hall. You know, sometimes, you know, during the summer times, I've had many experiences where I had to play, where they had to actually put heaters on the stage because it was that cold. And then, of course, there's a thing where you have 100-degree humidity, and everything slips and everything, you know, and you sweat with your hands and so on, and there's nothing you can do about it. Too many times I have said, "Oh, I forgot my cufflinks. Oh, I forgot my white tie. I forgot my cummerbund." This way, you know, it's like it looks neat. I just put a T-shirt and then I put a nice shirt on top of the thing, and it hides everything. It looks neat. I don't need to worry about anything. I had a tour of the Far East, and I went to. I went to China and in Shanghai, and then I went to a store and I saw this thing. I said, "Oh, that looks really nice." I put it on, and I don't know whether Toby, my wife, said, "You should try and play on it." And I tried, and I said, "Oh my God, that's so comfortable." There it was. Well, I've had a couple of interesting memory slips that forced me to actually compose as I was looking for, the to find myself back into the thing. So that was, shall we say, a nice experience, in quotes, and that was really something. And I remember I was playing, and all of a sudden I was doing my playing, and I heard the conductor clearing his throat in the middle of the performance, and I said to myself, can't he clear his throat quietly? Because it was going, you know, I said, what is he doing? So I kind of looked up, and he was going like that, you know, like with a kind of question mark. And then I realized that I actually skipped an entire movement. I started the beginning and I was already at the end. And so I immediately went into defense mode, and I just kind of went like that. Don't worry about it. And that's when I started to compose a couple of lines to get back to the cadence. I like certain reactions more than others. You know, sometimes the audience is very polite and clap nicely, and that's very nice. But then sometimes, you know, you have audience where they're very noisy. You know, when they like something and they shout bravo and stuff like that. So it's kind of nicer, you know. I mean, it's kind of gives you. But the more, for me, more important thing is you know, when you play in a concert hall that has really good acoustics, and you can play the hall. That's all I can. You can play the hall. There's certain halls in the States, for example, that are like that. For example, Boston Symphony Hall in Boston. So easy to play the hall because it has a lot of reverb that comes to you, and then you can control it. It's almost like, you know what it's like? I don't know if you've ever seen Frank Sinatra live or a video of Frank Sinatra. He knew how to work the mic. He would go with the mic closer or further and so on. And, you know, he had good mic savvy. So it's a little bit similar to that, you know, when you have a hall that gives you stuff and then you can sort of get the music, you know, and control the colors and so on because you have that hall. If you have a hall, for example, with the dry acoustics, it's more difficult. I'm only going to go until I feel that I'm not playing as well. And then I'm not going to, you know, if I have something to offer, why not? I must say that traveling is horrible. And sometimes I feel I don't want to do anything because of the traveling, because it's so impossible. The difficulty, you know, all of the challenges, hotels, you know, rooms which are not accessible, or they are accessible, and how are they accessible? Airports and so on. Horrible. Listen, it's horrible for a lot of people, but for me especially, it's even more horrible. So that for me, I would say, when I reach a point where I say I can't take that anymore, I would say, well, you know what I'll do? I'll just travel by car. If I can get to a place by car or by train, even train, then I'll do it. But otherwise, it's just impossible. It's really a very, very great problem for me. One of the most dangerous things to do is retire. You know, I mean, I love it. You know, sometimes people ask me to write letters, greeting letters to people who are retiring. He says, so and so is retiring. Can you write something nice to congratulate him? Congratulate him for what? To retire? That does not. You don't need congratulations to retire. What it says is, I hope you do something after you retire, because you know if you retire, and what's life for? You know, I mean, you know, how much can you sit down and at the beach or have sun or go fishing and stuff like that? After a while, you got to do something. So music in many ways is a very good profession because there's so many things you can do. You know, if you don't play, you can teach. If you don't teach, you can conduct. If you can conduct, you can talk, just like I do right now. So on. Large hands does not help you with the violin. Large hands is not something that you need average hands. Large hands help you with playing the piano, playing the cello, maybe playing the viola, but playing the violin, large hands is not a plus, and then sometimes it's a minus because the spaces on the violin are smaller. So, but I managed. I do at least 20 minutes a day. That's good if I do it. For me, the practicing is not so much how much you practice, it's the how often. At my age, it's how often. You know, if I do something every day, that's good. Rather than do a couple of hours one day and then not do anything for 3 or 4 days. That's bad. So it's the often-ness. I don't think that's a word. Is to do it as often as possible. So if you do it every day, your hands are familiar. To be a musician, you're recreating. That's your business, is creativity. You know, I mean, sometimes people say, when you're a composer, you're creating music. But when you're a musician, when you're a performer, you are recreating what's written. So, a lot of people connect certain things to music. Einstein felt that helped him. I know that a lot of people love to hear music when they don't feel well. and music is something that helps them. I know that in Israel, when things were not going well, there were rockets coming up, the concert halls were full of people. They came to hear concerts. That helped them forget. For me, a harmony is a painting. And then when you play something and the phrase is a very special phrase, I always tell my students, I said, it's not like, you go to a museum and you see a painting that's nice, 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 nice. Then you see the Mona Lisa and you just say nice, 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 and you just go away. And he said, no, if there's a special harmony, like a great harmony, you have to say that's something special, and and you have to show that in the way you phrase it. So you have to tell the audience, I am aware that this is a special moment in this piece. If you are aware of that, everybody will be aware of it. But if you just go like you pass by a great work of art and you just go, oh, nice, 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 then nobody's going to be aware of that. What is the definition of success in music? See, that has changed as well. Because it used to be that if you were not playing at Carnegie Hall with orchestras and solos, you were not a success. This is not the case today. Today you can be a success with so many other things. You can be a successful teacher, a successful chamber music player, a successful soloist, as successful at all three. But it's not as pure as it used to be. It's much more, people use more of their imagination. That's what I said to my students, because a lot of them, who are very, very talented, then comes a point, what do I do with my life in music? And those who are able to figure out and be imaginative, those are the ones that succeed. And it doesn't have to be in one thing. It doesn't have to be like, if I cannot do this, then I can't do anything. I think it's very exciting to be a musician. I don't think it's more or less. It's just exciting, and it's different. It's absolutely different. It's, things are, you used to be, management used to have programs where you could play 50 concerts a year in little towns and stuff like that. They don't have that anymore. So you have to do something else, You have to figure out, I know some of my students, they involved in music festivals. They become involved in chamber music. They become involved in a combination of stuff. It's a lot of people have, I always say you've got to use your imagination to see what you want to do, especially since you love it. If you're a musician and you just do it just for the sake because your parents told you to do it and so on, that you have to have it in your gut. So you have to say, I can't do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure out, I can figure this one out. Maybe I can do this as a group or whatever it is. It's you have to be imaginative. Classical music is here to stay, and it's always going to have a future. We've proved it. We've proved it. It's lasted a long time.